Dinosaurs coming to kill us all! What will the human race do? Talking animals? What will they do next?
A Supreme Court case entangles the military, socialist propaganda, and the First Amendment.
I'm Saul Weinstein.
I'm Aaron Glickman.
And I'm Stephen Lenrow. These stories coming up on 60 Minutes.
Freedom of speech always finds its way into the headlines through a court case. It seems that every year the boundaries of where and what kind of speech can take place are tested or established. Generally, the military has been allowed to restrict the speech of troops without issue. It's seen as a wartime necessity. But what about civilians employed by the military? Whose standards must they be held to? Alexander Kira was, until recently, a simple California native working as a military contractor on a United States Marines operations base in Yemen. Mr. Kira, a civilian, did construction and maintenance work on the base. But it's his off-the-clock actions that have landed him in the headlines. Mr. Kira was apprehended by the military officers after he was discovered handing out socialist propaganda and at a popular odd-hour spot for the troops. Kira, a lifelong socialist, had been handing out flyers calling on soldiers to embrace socialist ideals as a means to end the war on terror. Mr. Kira was found in violation of a Marine speech code, forbidding the promotion of ideas and philosophies which the military believes may, quote, disrupt military cohesion or military order. The military felt his speech could hinder the effectiveness of the soldiers and put the Marines in danger. Mr. Kira is awaiting trial in civilian court for sedition, a charge associated with a violation of this section of the military code. Mr. Kira sued, claiming as a private citizen the military code did not apply to him and that these changes of sedition violate the First Amendment rights. The Supreme Court has heard the case, and its decision will set a new precedent by ruling on the military's authority of civilians with regards to speech and sedition. We met with Mr. Kira at his apartment near the corner of Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, where he was out on bail. What is your reasoning behind this case?
The military arrested me for a violation of military policy regarding speech. If I were a soldier or even a military cook, this may have made sense. I would then go through the military justice system. The only problem is I am a civilian. I should not be tried in a civilian court for violating a military code. I was working for the government just like an Apple employee works for Apple, and we would never allow Apple to impose these regulations on workers outside the office. Just to be safe, I spread the socialist material during my time off. From a legal standpoint, I was an American citizen abroad. The government should not arrest me as an American citizen abroad.
So is the code itself wrong? How can the military operate if soldiers can advocate anything, even an overthrow of the chain of command?
I'm not questioning the military's code as it relates to military personnel. They enter under a different contract, but it is unconstitutional to impose that code on private citizens.
The military does not see any gap in jurisdiction, but rather a logical and necessary enforcement of law. The military's prosecuting lawyer, Frank Buckley, offered to meet with us in his Atlanta office to explain.
Because this man is a civilian, isn't it his right to distribute this type of speech protected?
Not necessarily. Courts have historically ruled that speech, which can cause an overthrow of the government or violence, is not protected by the First Amendment. An excellent example is Schenck v. U.S., in which the Supreme Court established the idea of clear and present danger. Now, one may argue that in Mr. Kira's case, he wasn't posing a danger. The court stated, however, in its Schenck case, that in times of war, like this one, standards must change. According to Schenck, Mr. Kira is not clearly protected by the First Amendment. Furthermore, in Dennis v. U.S., the court made a clear distinction between teaching about a dangerous philosophy and advocating a dangerous philosophy. If someone is found doing the latter, the First Amendment does not offer much protection. Mr. Kira was not teaching about socialism, but rather advocating a doctrine which, in a military context, could have created a clear and present danger.
Then, if this case is so clear-cut, why is the Supreme Court taking it up?
The threshold issue here isn't about Mr. Kira's rights. It's really about whether or not the military has a power over civilian and in what context. As a utilitarian matter, the military argues that it needs to have some jurisdiction over anybody working with military personnel. The Constitution doesn't give a clear guideline on the issue, but we believe that the necessary and proper clause can certainly apply to the situation. While the military wouldn't apply these same policies to some random civilian at home, a civilian contractor needs to be held to some degree of censorship in order for the military apparatus to function.
The ACLU, who has backed Mr. Kira in the case, sees this as both an issue of speech and jurisdiction. ACLU spokesman Leon Shea explained this from his office.
The clear and present danger idea established in Schenck doesn't really stick in Mr. Kira's case. His actions did not create any measurable danger, and if this will turn into a showdown between military rule and federal protection of speech, the court already demonstrated federal supremacy. Even Pennsylvania v. Nelson, which convicted a man of sedition, held that in cases of speech, federal authority is superior to states. We believe this principle applies to the military also.
With battle lines drawn, briefs written, and reporters waiting, the court is set to finish hearing and decide the case by this Friday. How will the court balance the issue? And what scope will its decision take? Whether or not Mr. Kira's speech can be considered sedition will hinge on a greater question that the court will have to answer. Can military laws of speech apply to civilians working for the military? Is applying military law to civilian contractors necessary and proper in order to maintain a military? Or does the supremacy of federal law free civilians from military codes? While some of us may feel unaffected by the court's decision, the scope of the case may widen, possibly out to other governmental sectors or even the private sector. We'll update you next week with the court's decision, the court's reasoning, and what it means for freedom of speech in the United States.